Cordelia Blackwood's arthritic fingers trembled as she opened the certified letter. At 83, she had lived through enough crises to recognize the weight of official documents. The foreclosure notice was stark: 30 days to pay $17,000 in back taxes, or lose the Victorian house that had sheltered 4 generations of her family. Her grandson Jasper looked up from his laptop, his 34-year-old face gaunt from months of unemployment and mounting debt. How bad? We're going to lose the house. He slammed the laptop shut. There has to be something. Great-grandfather wasn't poor when he built this place. Cordelia stared at the basement door she'd avoided for decades. Help me look through your great-grandfather's papers. The basement smelled of decay and secrets. Thomas Blackwood's boxes sat like monuments to a life she'd never fully understood. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through grimy windows as Jasper attacked the containers with desperate efficiency, while Cordelia moved more carefully through documents that felt dangerous to disturb. The first few boxes yielded nothing but routine business papers, insurance policies, and faded family photographs. But the box marked Private T. Blackwood 1943 made her hands shake as she opened it. Inside wasn't the deed or will she'd hoped for, but something far more sinister. Behind a faded portrait of her grandfather Silas, she found a loose panel in the wooden crate. Inside wasn't money, but a leather portfolio tied with string and a small velvet pouch that clinked with the weight of metal. Her arthritic fingers fumbled with the string, and when the portfolio fell open, the documents inside made her blood freeze. Contracts dated 1942 to 1944, correspondence in German with letterheads bearing eagles and swastikas. Photographs of her father shaking hands with men in SS uniforms outside what appeared to be a Swiss bank. The velvet pouch contained Nazi party pins, SS insignia, and a medallion engraved with a swastika that felt heavy as sin in her palm. Jesus Christ. Jasper breathed, reading over her shoulder. Grandma, these are contracts for selling aluminum and steel to German companies, through Swiss banks, during the war. He flipped through pages of correspondence, his voice growing more incredulous with each document. Look at these amounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, in 1,940 seconds money. The numbers were staggering enough to explain how Thomas had built this house, funded her private education, established their family's prominence in a town where most people struggled through the Depression and war years. Her father hadn't been a successful businessman. He had been a Nazi collaborator, profiting from genocide while his neighbors sent their sons to die fighting fascism. But there was more. Tucked beneath the contracts were shipping manifests detailing the transport of special materials to locations across occupied Europe, lists of Jewish businesses whose assets had been liquidated and their materials redirected to American buyers, photographs of factories being constructed with steel that bore Thomas Blackwood's shipping stamps. These aren't just business deals, Cordelia whispered, her voice barely audible. These are records of helping build concentration camps. Do you know what collectors pay for authentic Nazi memorabilia? Jasper's voice carried a desperate edge. This could be worth hundreds of thousands. You want to profit from this? I want to save our house. Everyone involved is dead, Grandma, but we're alive and facing eviction. That night, Cordelia found Thomas's private notebook in his desk. The early entries were businesslike, but as the war progressed, can't sleep. Keep thinking about the photographs in the papers. Heard Munich factory was liquidated. Rosen family status unknown. Her father had known exactly what he was enabling. Every comfort she'd ever known was built on blood money. The final entry stopped her cold. Set aside money for restitution. Hidden account, First National, account number 7749823. When the time comes, Cordelia will know what to do. The First National Bank manager's face went pale as he checked the account. With compound interest over 40 years, $2,300,000. Jasper's sharp intake of breath echoed in the marble-walled office. Enough money to solve every problem they'd ever had. The manager handed Cordelia a sealed envelope, her father's final letter. My dear daughter, if you are reading this, then the sins I buried have finally surfaced. I was a coward, Cordelia. I told myself I was building something for our family, but I was building it on graves. This money represents my profit from evil. Do what I could never do, give it back to those we wronged. Your ashamed father, Thomas. $2 million, Jasper said in the car. We can keep enough to save the house and still give most away. It's a compromise. It's blood money, all of it. The drive to the Holocaust Memorial Museum felt like a funeral procession. Jasper sat rigidly in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at the briefcase containing their family's damning secrets. The documents seemed to radiate guilt even through the leather binding, making the car feel contaminated with their presence. Dr. Sarah Goldstein's office felt like a sanctuary of careful scholarship, its walls lined with testimonies and artifacts that bore witness to humanity's capacity for both evil and survival. At 67, she had dedicated her life to ensuring that the stories of the vanished were never truly erased. She studied the documents with careful, practiced eyes, occasionally making notes in a neat handwriting that suggested decades of cataloging horrors. When she looked up, her expression was grave. "Your father's business dealings were more extensive than you might realize, Doctor," Goldstein said, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent confronting human cruelty. "These contracts show he was part of a network that helped the Reich circumvent international sanctions. The materials he provided were used in concentration camp construction, weapons manufacturing, and the infrastructure that made the genocide possible." She opened one of the shipping manifests, pointing to specific entries. This aluminum shipment, for instance. It went to a company called Metalwork Ost, which was a front for SS construction projects in occupied Poland. The steel from this contract here was used to build railway infrastructure specifically for deportation trains. Cordelia felt each word like a physical blow. Beside her, Jasper shifted uncomfortably, clearly calculating the monetary implications of Doctor as a very and stating the minute she heard. Goldstein's assessment, even as she detailed his great-grandfather's war crimes. "How many families?" Cordelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How many people were hurt by what he did?" "It's impossible to quantify suffering in numbers," Dr. Goldstein replied gently, but her eyes were hard with the accumulated weight of thousands of similar stories. "But these documents, they're evidence of crimes against humanity. They belong in our archives, where scholars can study them, where the families of victims might finally find answers about what happened to their loved ones. They don't belong in private hands, and they certainly don't belong in the collections of people who celebrate what your father helped enable." The warning was clear, though diplomatically phrased. "Doctor." Goldstein had seen enough Holocaust memorabilia find its way into the hands of neo-Nazis and white supremacists who treated these artifacts not as evidence of evil, but as trophies to be celebrated. "But they're legally ours, right?" Jasper interjected, his voice carrying a note of desperation that made Cordelia wince. "I mean, he was her father. Whatever he owned, she inherited." Dr. Goldstein's expression grew cold as winter stone. "Legally, yes. Morally, that's a different question entirely. Mr. Maxwell. Jasper Maxwell. Mr. Maxwell, imagine if someone stole your car, used it to commit a series of murders, then sold it and invested the profits. 40 years later, would you expect the criminal's grandchildren to have a moral right to those profits simply because enough time had passed?" The analogy hung in the air like a challenge. Jasper's face flushed, but he pressed on. "That's different. Those people are dead. We're alive and facing real problems right now." "The dead deserve justice too, Doctor," Goldstein said quietly, "and many of their children and grandchildren are very much alive, still dealing with the consequences of what was stolen from their families." As they prepared to leave, Dr. Goldstein handed Cordelia a card. "If you decide to do the right thing, call me. I can put you in touch with families who might have answers they've been seeking for decades. But Mrs. Blackwood, don't wait too long. Some of the survivors are in their 90s. Every month we lose more voices that will never be heard again." The drive home was suffocatingly silent, except for the rhythmic sound of rain against the windshield. Cordelia stared out at the familiar landscape of her childhood, wondering how many other secrets lay buried beneath the surface of their seemingly innocent small New England town. How many other families like theirs had built their American dreams on European nightmares? When they pulled into the driveway, a black sedan was waiting, sleek, expensive, and somehow predatory in the way it crouched beside their modest Honda. The man who emerged wore a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to acquiring whatever he wanted, regardless of its original owner's feelings on the matter. "Mrs. Blackwood?" His smile was practiced, professional, and utterly without warmth. "I'm Richard Kellerman, private acquisitions specialist. I understand you've recently discovered some family documents that might be of considerable historical interest." "How did you?" Cordelia began, but Kellerman raised a manicured hand. Word travels fast in certain circles, particularly when items of such significance surface unexpectedly. "I represent clients who collect wartime artifacts and documents. Very discreet clients who appreciate the historical significance of such items and are willing to pay accordingly for the privilege of preserving them." He produced a check from his jacket pocket with the flourish of a magician, revealing his final trick. $500,000, Mrs. Blackwood. Cash on delivery, no questions asked, no publicity. My clients value their privacy above all else, and I assume you value yours." Jasper's eyes widened at the summer money than either of them had ever seen in one place, but Cordelia felt only revulsion at the man's oily confidence and the implications of his offer. She had seen enough movies to know what very discreet clients meant when it came to Nazi memorabilia. "Get off my property." Kellerman's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Mrs. Blackwood, I understand this is emotionally difficult, but you should know that if these items enter the public sphere donated to museums, sold at legitimate auction houses, the historical community will investigate their provenance thoroughly. Your family name will be connected to Nazi collaboration in every history book, every database, every Holocaust education website that exists. Your neighbors will know, your friends will know. Future generations of your family will carry this stain forever. He leaned closer, and she caught a whiff of expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask something rotten underneath. Is that really what you want for your legacy? For your grandson's future? My offer provides a clean solution. The documents disappear into private hands, your family's reputation remains intact, and you have enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your days. I said, get off my property. Kellerman shrugged, pocketing the check with theatrical disappointment. I'll leave my card on your mailbox, Mrs. Blackwood. When you realize that moral posturing doesn't pay property taxes, call me. But don't wait too long. Interest in these items is high, and I have other potential sellers who might be more pragmatic. After his sedan disappeared down the tree-lined street, Jasper exploded with the fury of someone watching his salvation drive away. $500,000, Grandma. Do you know what that would solve? We could pay off the house, clear my debts, have enough left over to live comfortably for years, and he's right, if we go public with this, everyone will know about Great-Grandpa. Is destroying our family's reputation worth being broke and homeless? But Cordelia was thinking of something else entirely. That evening, while Jasper paced the living room like a caged animal, she made a phone call to information, then another to a number in Philadelphia that rang 4 times before an elderly, cautious voice answered. Hello? Mr. Rosen? My name is Cordelia Blackwood. I believe my father may have done business with your family during the war. Mr. Rosen? I believe my father may have done business with your family during the war. The silence stretched before the elderly voice responded. Thomas Blackwood? My family lost everything in 1943. We came to America with nothing because of what was stolen from us. I want to make it right. You can't make it right, but there are survivors, children and grandchildren still struggling because we started from nothing. When she hung up, Jasper was standing in the doorway. Are you insane? You're going to give our money to strangers because of something that happened before you were born? It's not our money. It never was. The argument that followed was the worst of their relationship. Jasper accused her of caring more about strangers than family. Cordelia accused him of being willing to profit from genocide. That night, she heard him on the phone. Call Kellerman back. Tell him we accept. By morning, he was gone, leaving only a note. I can't watch you destroy us both for people who died before I was born. Rachel Cohen arrived the next day, younger than Cordelia expected, with her great-grandmother's dark eyes and quiet intensity. My great-grandfather was Samuel Cohen. He built Cohen fine jewelry in Vienna from nothing. Then the Nazis came. She showed Cordelia a photograph. A proud man outside an elegant storefront. His family gathered around him with the confidence of people secure in their world. What happened? Samuel and most of his children were deported in 1943. Only my grandmother Sarah survived, hidden by a neighbor. She was 14 when they took her father away. Cordelia handed over the inventory sheets detailing the seizure of Cohen fine jewelry, the liquidation of assets, the transfer of materials to Thomas Blackwood's operation. Rachel read in silence, her face growing pale. Your great-grandfather bought our gold, and this house, your family's success, it was built on what was stolen from us. Cordelia told her about the bank account, about Thomas's letter, about the $2 million in compound guilt. Instead of anger, Rachel began to cry exhausted tears of someone who had carried too much. Do you know what that money would mean? My cousin works 3 jobs to keep his disabled daughter in care. My aunt lost her house and lives in a moldy studio. We've struggled for generations because we started with nothing. The money is yours, all of it. But what about you? If I take it knowing it will make you homeless, how am I different from your great-grandfather? Before Cordelia could answer, Jasper burst in with Kellerman behind him. Grandma, we need to talk. He was drunk, desperate. She's one of them, isn't she? Come to collect their pound of flesh? My family was destroyed by your great-grandfather, Rachel said quietly. Everyone who made those decisions is dead. We're alive and struggling. Kellerman opened his briefcase, displaying contracts and Nazi artifacts. Mr. Jasper has already signed as your agent. I never gave him authority. Your medical power of attorney extends to financial decisions if you're deemed incompetent. Giving away $2 million while facing foreclosure meets that definition. You're selling Nazi memorabilia to private collectors? Rachel stared at the artifacts. Do you know who buys this? Neo-Nazis? White supremacists who want to own a piece of the Holocaust. That's not my problem, Jasper said, but his voice lacked conviction. Your family's house was built with blood money, and you want to glorify genocide for profit? The slap cracked across Jasper's face like a gunshot. In the silence that followed, Cordelia spoke clearly. Mr. Kellerman, get out of my house. Take your contracts and leave. The meeting took place in Estate Attorney Margaret Winter's office. Around the conference table sat Cordelia, Jasper, his face still marked, Rachel and 2 other survivors' descendants, and Winters herself, gray-haired and steady from decades navigating law and morality. Legally, Mrs. Blackwood, the money is yours, Winters began. But morally, this is complex. Your father was complicit in what would now be crimes against humanity. David Weiss, grandson of a textile manufacturer, leaned forward. My grandfather's factory was seized in 1943, converted to produce concentration camp uniforms using materials Thomas Blackwood helped provide. 3 generations have struggled because of what was stolen. Sarah Klein, 91, with shaking hands, added, "My uncle's precious metals business. Seized in 1944, the gold sold to American buyers, including Blackwood. My uncle died in Bergen-Belsen while Blackwood profited." "We can't change what happened 80 years ago," Jasper said. "Most victims are dead. We're dealing with consequences we didn't create." "Consequences of living comfortably off stolen money for 3 generations?" David shot back. Winters raised her hand for silence. "The question is, what can be done now that serves both justice and reality?" She consulted her files. "Mrs. Blackwood, your house is worth $340,000, but you owe $47,000 in taxes and need $80,000 in repairs. The original theft would be worth $12 million today. The $2.3 million represents partial restitution." She outlined options. Keep all the money, save your house, survivors get nothing. Give everything away, lose your house, satisfy moral obligations. Or find middle ground, you keep $200,000 for debts, remaining $2.1 million goes to victims' families, and the house becomes a Holocaust education center with you as caretaker. The room fell silent as implications sank in. "What about me?" Jasper asked. "You could help run the memorial, or take $50,000 and start over honestly. $50,000 won't cover my debts, but it would let you rebuild without blood money." They spent hours wrestling with choices that had no perfect answers. Finally, Cordelia said, "I need you all to see the house, understand what we're talking about preserving and what we're giving up." The tour began in Thomas's study, afternoon light illuminating the mahogany desk where he'd planned his profitable evil. Rachel examined the room where her family's fate had been decided by a stranger. "He sat in that chair every evening," Cordelia said. "I did homework at that table while he worked. I thought he was a pillar of the community." "This is where he signed contracts that destroyed my great-grandfather's business?" "Yes." They moved through rooms, room by room: the dining room, where Thomas entertained associates laundering stolen assets; the living room where Cordelia played surrounded by furniture bought with genocide profits; the kitchen with dishes purchased with blood money. In the basement, Jasper finally broke. Sitting on an old trunk, he sobbed with ugly, wrenching sounds. "This house, this family, name it, was all I had. My business failed, my marriage ended, friends stopped calling. The only thing that kept me going was believing I came from decent people." Rachel knelt beside him, anger replaced by compassion. "Finding out everything you believed was a lie, it's devastating. You can choose to honor your family's memory, fight for justice. What am I supposed to do? Be proud my great-grandfather was a Nazi collaborator?" David spoke carefully. "Maybe honor isn't about being proud of where you came from. Maybe it's about what you choose to do with what you've inherited." That evening in the living room, Rachel said, "My grandmother died last month, still wondering what happened to her father's business, still hoping someone would acknowledge that her family mattered." Cordelia walked to the mantelpiece with family photographs chronicling generations of Blackwood prosperity, all funded by systematic destruction of lives. "There's something else." She pulled down her wedding photo from 1965. This was taken in the garden. Marcus looked handsome in his Navy uniform. She turned to face them, tears streaming. Marcus lost 3 fingers at Guadalcanal, came home with shrapnel and nightmares. He lived 50 years off profits from the war machine that killed his friends. He never knew because I never knew. If he had understood that every comfort we enjoyed was connected to the Holocaust, it would have destroyed him. That's why this has to end with us," she continued. "Not because we're responsible for my father's crimes, but because we're responsible for what we do now that we know." Sarah Klein asked, "What if we're wrong? What if trying to make amends causes more pain? My family spent 80 years learning to live with loss, opening old wounds. What if it hurts more than helps?" They talked through the night, understanding that whatever they decided would be imperfect, would cause some pain while alleviating other pain, would satisfy some needs while leaving others unmet. But as morning light streamed through windows paid for with blood money, they all understood that doing nothing was no longer an option. Epilogue: The Weight of Memory. 6 months later. The brass plaque read, "The Thomas Blackwood Memorial Center for Holocaust Education, Confronting American Complicity. 1939 to 1945. Cordelia ran her fingers over the engraved letters each morning, still not quite believing her childhood home had become a classroom for uncomfortable truths. The transformation had been painful but necessary. Thomas's study now housed display cases with his documents, presented alongside survivor testimonies. The dining room became a small theater for documentaries about American businesses that profited from Nazi persecution. Cordelia lived in a small apartment created from the master bedroom, her world reduced to 3 rooms and the weight of being a living reminder of how ordinary people enable extraordinary evil. At 83, she had become an unwilling educator, explaining to students how her father chose profit over principle. Jasper had stayed 2 months, then taken his settlement and moved to Oregon to build houseshonist work that left him exhausted, but sleeping peacefully. He called every Sunday, their conversations careful bridges over the chasm of choices that changed their lives. The survivors' families used their restitution differently. Rachel established a refugee scholarship fund. David paid for his son's medical school. Sarah moved to a better nursing home, where she spent her final months telling her story to visitors who would carry it forward. The memorial attracted perhaps 50 visitors monthly, not enough to be self-sustaining, but enough to matter. Cordelia watched teenagers stare shocked at photographs of Nazi rallies in American cities, saw college students realize that evil wasn't always foreign. She answered questions with painful honesty. Some visitors were angry, accusing her of betraying America. Others were grateful, finally understanding how systematic evil required cooperation from thousands of ordinary people who convinced themselves they were just doing business. Hate mail came regularly from people who believed she was part of a conspiracy, who denied the Holocaust, who threatened to burn down the house. But so did letters from families who found courage to confront their own buried secrets. On this autumn morning, reviewing monthly finances, the phone rang. Blackwood Memorial Center. Mrs. Blackwood? This is Jennifer Martinez from San Antonio. I read about your center online. I think my grandfather might have done business with your father during the war. Cordelia recognized the tremor, the same mixture of fear and desperate need for truth she'd felt 6 months ago. What did you find? Documents in my grandfather's safe, contracts with German companies, Swiss bank correspondence, photographs with Nazi uniforms. He ran a shipping company. The documents suggest he smuggled gold and artwork from Europe to American buyers, 1,942 to 1,944. Another family, another fortune built on suffering, another generation discovering their comfortable lives were purchased with blood money. Cordelia felt the familiar weight of shared guilt and painful hope that truth, however devastating, was better than comfortable lies. Miss Martinez, why don't you start from the beginning? As she listened, Cordelia looked out at the garden where she'd married 58 years ago. The roses Thomas planted still bloomed each summer, their beauty unchanged by knowledge of how they'd been purchased. But now they served a different purpose, reminding visitors that even beauty could be tainted by evil choices, and that redemption required courage to face uncomfortable truths. The memorial would never undo Thomas Blackwood's damage, never restore what was stolen. But it could ensure his crimes weren't forgotten, his victims weren't erased, and future generations might choose differently when faced with profit versus principle. As Cordelia began taking notes on the Martinez family's buried secrets, she realized this was her father's true legacy, not the wealth he'd accumulated, but the ongoing responsibility to confront consequences of evil choices, one painful conversation at a time. Outside, autumn leaves fell like tears, covering the ground where Thomas lay beneath a simple headstone bearing only his name and dates. No epitaph celebrated his accomplishments. He had become what everyone becomes, a story told by survivors, a lesson learned by those who come after. The only question that mattered was what kind of lesson his life would teach.